I knew the moment their laughter filled the rooftop that they expected me to crumble. They expected tears, a scene, a humiliation to match the one they engineered for me. Instead, I stood still long enough to let the sound wash over me like cold water. The absence of a seat at the Hartwell family table felt like the final act of a play I had unknowingly been cast in years ago. Yet as I looked at the 12 chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, the truth settled over me with terrifying clarity. They believed they had already written my ending. My name is Claire Bennett, and for years I had worked behind velvet curtains and mirrored ballrooms to build a life that looked elegant from the outside. I built Meridian events from nothing but grit and the kind of nights where you fall asleep at your computer only to wake up and keep going. Boston's elite hired me not because they cared about me, but because they trusted the way I shaped evenings that made them look better. My job wasn't just planning events, it was choreographing the illusion that their lives were seamless. I met Liam Hartwell the night I transformed a government rotunda into a winter wonderland. His smile had been warm, his charm deliberate, and yet for all the privilege he carried like a tailored suit, there was something disarming in the way he listened. He complimented the lighting, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel seen, not for my utility, but for my work. I didn't realize then how easy it was for men like him to separate admiration from genuine respect. Our relationship grew quickly. He showed up with coffee on days when my schedule was brutal. He came to events I planned and stood in corners watching me coordinate with staff, telling me afterward how impressed he was by the magic I created. When he proposed, it felt like the beginning of a story I had worked all my life to deserve. But the Hartwells weren't impressed by my resilience. They liked my results, not my background. The first time I met Beatrice, his mother, she looked at me as if I were an understudy who had stepped into a role out of turn. She disguised her disdain behind phrases so polished they could have been monogrammed on linen. "It's admirable," she said once, "how you built your own business. Very American." The implication lingered, admirable didn't mean acceptable. I tried to prove myself anyway. I planned their charity galas, arranged their fundraisers, oversaw their anniversaries. They allowed me close enough to serve them, but never close enough to be one of them. Still, I held on to the belief that effort could change perception. Love made you reckless like that. When Beatrice announced she wanted her 70th birthday celebration in Rome, she asked me, quite matter-of-factly, to plan it. I took it as a chance to show her I belonged. A week of private venues, curated menus, vineyard lunches, a villa reserved only for old names whispered in upper-crust circles. The final evening would take place at a rooftop restaurant overlooking one of the most breathtaking views in the world. I should have known then that this was all part of something bigger. The first red flag came months before we left. Payments lagged, vendors emailed me quietly asking if deposits were truly guaranteed. When I asked Liam, he brushed it off. "Bank delays," he said. "International wires are complicated." I trusted him because I wanted to. I trusted him because marriage is an act of faith, and faith makes us slow to see what is right in front of us. But the truth became impossible to ignore the morning of our flight. The notification on Liam's phone was small, no louder than a breath, but it changed everything. A message from Isabella, a name with a history. I wasn't the jealous type, but the preview was enough to make my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you in Rome," it read. "Have you told her yet?" My hand trembled as I opened the thread. What I found wasn't subtle. Plans. Affection. A future. A baby coming in 4 months. The world narrowed until I could hear nothing but the rush of my own breath. I took screenshots because some part of me knew I needed proof before I lost myself completely. I packed my suitcase, plastered on a smile, and boarded the plane with the family as if nothing had changed. Because for the first time, I understood that everything was changing. Rome made their arrogance louder. The Hartwells moved through the hotel lobby like they owned time itself. I watched as reservations I'd spent months coordinating were altered behind my back. They left for outings without telling me. They whispered in corners with glances that dismissed me before I reached them. Liam, once attentive, now left early and came back late, claiming errands, calls, meetings that dissolved the moment I asked for details. And then came the discovery that turned suspicion into certainty. His briefcase. Left open. Documents inside that confirmed the truth I was supposed to discover only after the birthday gala. Drafted divorce papers. Financial statements showing funds moved quietly out of our marital accounts. Plans to present our separation as mutual, civil, ideal. Plans to shift blame onto me in a way that would protect their reputation and their money. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was how methodical it all was. How seamlessly they crafted my exit while smiling at me across breakfast tables. How they thought I'd play my role willingly. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who I was. Behind the soft-spoken wife they underestimated was a woman who spent years managing disasters for the wealthy, putting out fires, collecting evidence, securing every detail so no one else saw the cracks. I knew how to build an event from the ground up. I also knew how to dismantle one. I gathered everything, emails he'd printed, notes, statements, contract drafts. I took photos, organized files, backed them up to accounts only I had access to. While the Hartwells explored Rome without me, I gathered the materials that would unravel the illusion they'd built. By the morning of the gala, I had enough proof to turn the Hartwell world upside down. But I still didn't understand the full scope of their strategy until I overheard Beatrice. She was speaking to the restaurant manager, her voice crisp and sure. 12 seats, she said. Not 13. I don't care what the reservation originally said. My son's wife will not be staying for the dinner. It's a family matter. A family matter. I felt my blood go still. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the culmination of a plan they'd built for months, maybe years, humiliate me publicly, make me storm off, then frame the divorce as my emotional instability. They wanted witnesses. They wanted control. They wanted me small. But they forgot that I had power too, and more leverage than they could imagine. That night, I walked into the rooftop restaurant wearing a midnight blue dress I had saved for an occasion worth remembering. I looked calm. I looked composed. I looked like a woman ready to play her part. What they didn't know was that I had already rewritten the ending. When the elevator doors opened and I saw the table, the 12 chairs, none for me, I felt something inside me settle. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It burned. And then it cooled into something far, far more dangerous. I walked toward the table, counted the seats, and waited for the moment Liam delivered his line. Looks like we miscounted, he said, laughing softly. And everyone joined in. Everyone except me. Because I already knew what was coming next. I leaned in, let the silence stretch, and said with absolute calm. Seems I'm not family. Then I turned and walked away, not just from the table, but from the life they tried to script for me. And behind me, without knowing it yet, the Hartwells had exactly 30 minutes before their entire world collapsed. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped out of the restaurant, but inside me everything felt strangely still, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't shake the way they expected. I walked with deliberate calm down the stone steps and onto the quiet street below, the faint sounds of chatter fading behind me. Their laughter would die soon enough. A cafe sat just across the narrow road, small, dimly lit, tucked between a boutique and a flower shop that smelled faintly of citrus and fresh basil. I slipped inside and took a seat facing the restaurant's entrance. The server approached with polite curiosity. "Un café?" he asked. "Espresso," I said. "Strong." While he walked away, I opened my phone, not to scroll aimlessly, but to begin the part they never anticipated, the unraveling. The rooftop dinner wasn't just an event, it was the anchor of the entire Rome itinerary. Without the financial guarantees I had personally signed for, the structure of their carefully curated week would collapse like dominoes. They assumed all arrangements were secured under their name because that's how their world operated, other people handled their details. But the reality was simple. Every deposit, every vendor partnership, every contract had been handled through Meridian Events, my company, my accounts, my authority. I pulled up the files I had already prepared and sent a message to Marco, the manager at the rooftop restaurant. The subject line was simple: immediate action required. Attached were copies of my credentials as the authorized coordinating party, the deposit reversal requests I had pre-filled, and the payment release codes tied to my business account. Please proceed with the cancellation protocol previously discussed, I typed. Inform the guests when appropriate. 5 minutes later, his reply came. Confirmado, Signora Bennett. We will follow your instructions. I leaned back, lifted the espresso cup, and felt the bitter warmth hit my tongue. Revenge shouldn't taste good. But in that moment, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that radiated through me. Not because I wanted to destroy them, but because they had tried to destroy me first. They had scripted my downfall. I was scripting their reckoning. Next, I opened my vendor list, a detailed spreadsheet that mapped every hour of their week-long celebration. A vineyard lunch in Frascati. A private Vatican tour. A full-day chauffeured trip along the coast. A villa in Tuscany reserved exclusively for them. Each contact was saved in alphabetical order, each contract signed under Meridian Events, each deposit secured through my company's credit line. I started at the top. The vineyard answered on the second ring. The owner recognized my voice immediately. Signora Bennett. Everything is ready for the Hartwell group tomorrow. There's been a change in the itinerary, I said calmly. The luncheon is cancelled. Please release the reservation and process the refund to the original payment method. A pause, then a polite, capito. We will take care of everything immediately. One by one, like cutting threads from a tapestry, I made every cancellation. The Vatican guide thanked me for the update. The chauffeur service accepted the revised plan without question. The Tuscany villa manager, Carmen, nearly gasped when I told her to release the entire week-long booking. It was their most expensive accommodation, and I had personally tipped the staff for preparation weeks in advance. Within 17 minutes, every piece of the Hartwell trip had evaporated from the schedule. My phone buzzed. A message from Liam. Where are you? Stop this. Don't make a scene. I didn't respond. A second message came 30 seconds later. Claire, come back to the table. This isn't funny. Still, I stayed silent. By the 20th minute, his tone had changed completely. What did you do with the reservation? The manager says something is wrong with the guarantee. Fix this. A slow, steady calm flowed through me as I set the phone face down on the table. They thought they knew me. They thought they knew exactly how I would react. But they didn't know the woman who had survived 14-hour event days, demanding clients, impossible deadlines, and a world determined to underestimate her. They didn't know the woman who handled crises quietly, the one who could solve problems before anyone even realized they existed. They didn't understand the strength that grows when you spend years fixing other people's disasters. The Hartwells had crafted their cruelty with precision. But I planned with precision too. The difference was simple. I had a heart that felt everything, and they had hearts so cold they assumed no one else did. The 30-minute mark approached. I finished my espresso, left payment on the table, and stepped out into the night air again. From across the street, I could see a slight shift in the rooftop staff's movements, Marco and two servers walking toward the Hartwell table with a polite urgency that only meant one thing: they were about to be told. I crossed the street slowly, the heels of my shoes tapping against cobblestone like a quiet drumbeat. I entered through the service doorway, an entrance I had used earlier that afternoon when reviewing the setup. The hallway smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon zest, the lingering aroma of preparation. Marco spotted me. 5 minutes, yes. 5 minutes, I confirmed. He guided me into a small alcove behind a decorative partition, hidden yet perfectly positioned so I could see everything. The table glowed under warm golden light, the champagne flute still half full, the floral centerpiece immaculate. And then I watched the chaos begin. Marco approached Richard first, Liam's father. He was the head of the table, the most prideful, the most concerned with appearances. Marco spoke softly, discreetly. But the shift in Richard's expression was immediate. His brows furrowed. His eyes widened. His face darkened with something between embarrassment and panic. He pulled out his wallet, rifling through cards, speaking quickly. I knew exactly what was happening. The restaurant needed a new guarantee to continue service now that Meridian's payment authorization had been revoked. But the Hartwells weren't financially stable. They were holding up a collapsing house of privilege with frayed rope and empty accounts. They couldn't afford the dinner, at least, not without exposing their financial instability to Rome's hospitality network. Liam was next. He looked at Marco's tablet, saw the confirmation files showing the cancellations, saw the signature authorization of mine, and the blood drained from his face. Melissa whispered urgently to her husband. Beatrice stared with wide, trembling eyes, her fingertips pressed to her pearl necklace as if she expected it to reassure her. The servers stood nearby, professional but uncomfortable, sensing the fallout. I waited until the exact moment their panic reached full clarity, until their humiliation became visible enough to match the one they tried to force on me. Liam, don't insult my intelligence, I said gently. Not tonight. Then I turned to leave. I walked past the servers, past the kitchen door, past the entrance where I had once stood with pride as their planner, their daughter-in-law, the woman they thought they could shape. At the edge of the terrace, I paused and glanced back at them. A dozen faces stared at me, angry, terrified, shattered, and I realized something profound. They weren't powerful without their façade. They were hollow. And I was finally free of being part of their emptiness. I lifted my chin and said one last thing before disappearing into the night. You planned to ruin me. Instead, you reminded me who I am. And with that, I walked down the steps and into a life where my name would never again depend on theirs. The moment I stepped out of the restaurant, the cool Roman night wrapped around me like a strange kind of comfort, quiet, steady, indifferent to the chaos I had left behind. Inside, they were still scrambling to make sense of the disaster that had unfolded at their perfect, hand-picked table. Outside, for the first time in months, my mind felt clear. I didn't pause to savor it. I walked down the steps and onto the main road, the distant hum of mopeds and the soft chatter of tourists echoing across the stone walls. My phone vibrated relentlessly in my hand, calls, texts, alerts, but I let them stack up without opening a single one. I didn't owe them my attention anymore. Instead, I walked back to the hotel, each step grounding me further in the reality I'd chosen for myself. The city lights shimmered against the cobblestone roads, casting elongated shadows that felt strangely symbolic, like I was walking away from something that had been clinging to my ankles for years. When I reached the hotel, the lobby was quiet, the night staff attentive but unobtrusive. A concierge I'd worked with earlier in the week recognized me immediately. "Signora Bennett," he said gently, "is everything all right?" "Everything is finally how it needs to be," I replied. He nodded as if he understood more than I was saying. I walked past him, up the marble staircase instead of taking the elevator. I needed the movement. I needed the ritual of leaving one floor and ascending to another. By the time I reached the suite, my pulse had settled. The room was empty. Liam, of course, was still at the dinner, attempting to salvage what remained of their pride. Good. It gave me time. I opened my suitcase and packed the few things I had unpacked. My dresses, the toiletries I'd lined neatly on the counter, the shoes I'd slipped off earlier. I moved through the room with calm precision, the same way I used to prepare venues before events. There was no rush. None at all. Everything that needed to fall apart had already begun crumbling. I didn't need to push anything anymore. Momentum was on my side. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the desk with such insistence it nearly slid off. I glanced at the screen. A dozen missed calls from Liam. 5 from Beatrice. 3 from Richard. And 1 from an unknown international number, the restaurant, probably. I ignored all of them. I left the packed suitcase by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, letting a long breath unwind from my chest. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint rumble of a mopeds passing below my window. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something close to peace. Then my phone buzzed once more, this time with a message preview that caught my eye. A text from Liam. "Claire. Please. We need to talk. My mother is having a panic attack. My father is furious. The manager says everything is cancelled. Everyone is watching us. Come back. I exhaled slowly, the bitterness of irony settling in. For years, I had been the one smoothing their crises. Now they wanted me to return and clean up the disaster they created. A part of me wondered if Liam even understood what he had done, how deeply he had underestimated me. But another part of me no longer cared. I typed a single reply. No. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't owe explanations to people who had written me out of their family with surgical precision. I didn't owe emotional labor to someone who had planned to discard me. I didn't owe grace to a family that had wielded cruelty as tradition. I stood up, took my suitcase, and walked to the door, but before leaving, I paused at the desk. A folder lay there, the one I'd tucked away earlier. Inside were the documents I had printed, copies of their offshore accounts, statements, records. Hard proof of their financial collapse. I placed the folder on the desk, not as a gift, but as a mirror. Something they would have to look into eventually. Then I slipped out of the room, leaving the door unlocked behind me. The hallway was glowing softly under warm lights. I wheeled my suitcase toward the elevator, and as I waited, I heard the faint ding of another elevator door somewhere above me. Voices spilled out, urgent, frantic, angry. The Hartwells were on their way back. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't need one. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and let the doors close just as another elevator chimed down the hall. Perfect timing. In the lobby, the concierge stepped forward politely. Checking out early, Signora? Yes, I said with a small smile. Please settle the room balance under my name. And cancel any outstanding services attached to my reservation. He nodded, making the adjustments swiftly. Would you like a taxi arranged? No, thank you. I'll walk. He handed me a printed receipt. Safe travels. And, buona fortuna. Thank you, I said softly. The hotel doors opened silently as I stepped out into the cool night. The sky above Rome was a velvet canvas streaked with stars, the streets alive but gentle at this hour. I walked without hurry, suitcase rolling steadily behind me, my phone still powered off in my jacket pocket. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was simply walking toward myself. And then, halfway down a quiet street lined with shuttered shops, I heard footsteps approaching quickly behind me. I didn't turn around. Claire. Liam's voice shouted, breathless, strained. Claire, stop. I kept walking. He caught up to me only because I let him. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes wild, not with grief, but with fear. The kind of fear rich men feel when their world shows its first real crack. Why are you doing this? He demanded, stepping in front of me. Why are you trying to destroy my family? I met his eyes evenly. I'm not destroying anything. I just stopped protecting you. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That dinner, my mother, she's shaken. My father is threatening to fire half the staff. Guests are talking. The restaurant is demanding payment up front because you cancelled everything. Do you understand how humiliating this is? His panic was a living thing, heavy, clawing, frantic. For years, I had seen it only from the sidelines, always as the person expected to mop it up. Now he stood before me, chest heaving, trembling with a chaos he couldn't hide. I tilted my head. You're worried about humiliation? Of course I am, he snapped. This isn't how it was supposed to go. How was it supposed to go? I asked quietly. You humiliate me with a missing chair, present our divorce as mutual, reveal your affair in a way that makes me look unstable, and walk away with public sympathy? His mouth dropped open, but he had no words. You plan to control the story, I said. But I refuse to let you write my ending. He rubbed his face in frustration. Jesus, Claire. My family depends on me. I didn't want things to get ugly. They got ugly the moment you chose lies over honesty. He shook his head, pacing a moment as if searching for an angle he hadn't tried yet. We can fix this, he said. We still have a marriage. I still care about you. My laughter was quiet, but it cut through the air like glass. Liam. You cared about control. Not me. He swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. Then tell me what you want. Tell me what it takes to end this peacefully. And there it was. Not love. Not remorse. Not even guilt. Just negotiation. What I want, I said softly, is the one thing your family never allowed me. He frowned. Which is? Choice. I stepped around him and continued walking. He didn't follow this time. Maybe because he finally understood he had nothing left to offer me. Maybe because he realized the woman he had underestimated for so long wasn't going to look back. I walked into the night, pulling my suitcase behind me, feeling the strange, powerful quiet of liberation settle into my bones. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was finally, irrevocably, choosing myself. The streets of Rome were quieter now, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath, your own heartbeat, your own thoughts with unsettling clarity. Street lamps glowed like small halos over the cobblestones, and the air carried a soft coolness that wrapped around me as I walked with my suitcase trailing behind. It was late, later than I realized, but adrenaline made time feel suspended. I didn't know where I was going, only that moving forward mattered more than the destination. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to avoid pain. I wasn't trying to hold anything together. I wasn't trying to fit into a life that didn't want me. I was simply existing. Simply choosing. At a small plaza, I paused beneath an ancient stone fountain, watching the water trickle in a rhythmic whisper. I sat on the edge, letting the night settle around me. My phone was still turned off, the silence was intoxicating. No alerts. No demands. No crises that needed my attention. I was alone, and for the first time since stepping into the Hartwell world, that solitude felt like freedom instead of abandonment. Minutes passed, maybe more. I don't know. Time in Rome stretches differently at night. Eventually, when my mind had calmed enough to think clearly, I powered my phone back on. It lit up like a fire alarm. 54 text messages. 26 missed calls. 3 voicemails. A flood of notifications that would have once sent me spiraling. But now I scrolled through them with detachment. Beatrice, your cruelty is astounding. You've embarrassed us beyond repair. Richard, our attorneys will be in touch. Melissa, you're insane. You think you won? Just wait. And then Liam. So many from Liam. The messages started with irritation, quickly shifted into confusion, then into panic, and finally into raw desperation. Claire, what did you do? Come back. We can talk this out. The hotel said our booking is cancelled. Why? The restaurant won't continue service without a new guarantee. The vendors you booked all say the reservations disappeared. My mother is crying. Fix this. This isn't you. Please call me. Where are you? Claire. I'm scared. Please. That last one made me pause, not because I felt sympathy, but because it finally revealed the truth I had suspected all along. He wasn't scared of losing me. He was scared of losing the illusion of control. Scared of losing the financial stability he pretended to possess. Scared of exposure. Scared of consequences. His fear had nothing to do with love. It had everything to do with losing the version of his life that looked good from the outside. I slid the phone back into my pocket and stood, stretching my legs. The plaza was peaceful. Rome felt strangely protective in that moment, as if the city itself understood stories of betrayal, of fallen empires, of women rising from ruins. I walked again until I reached a taxi stand. A driver leaned against his car reading a newspaper. He looked up when I approached. Airport, he asked in accented English. Yes, I said. Please. He nodded, opened the trunk for my suitcase, and we started the drive through the sleeping city. As the taxi glided through narrow alleys, I rested my forehead against the window, watching the light smear into golden streaks. When we reached the airport, I booked the earliest flight out. First-class seat, a small luxury I allowed myself, not because I needed comfort, but because I deserved the dignity of space after the emotional suffocation of the past months. I boarded just before dawn, settling into a window seat while the world outside slowly shifted from dark blue to pale lavender. Somewhere over Europe, I finally let my eyes close. I slept. Not fitfully. Not anxiously. Deeply. Hours later, I landed in Boston and stepped into a familiar chill that cut straight through the fog of exhaustion. I took a cab straight home to the brownstone that had once felt like a shared dream but now felt more like a building I had briefly occupied for someone else. The house was silent. Liam was still in Rome, probably firefighting the ruins I left behind. I walked through the rooms, touching nothing that didn't belong to me. I didn't linger in the kitchen where we used to drink morning coffee. I didn't pause in the living room where we'd hosted parties for people who smiled at me but judged quietly. I didn't even glance at the bedroom that still smelled faintly of him. I went straight to my office, my sanctuary. I opened my laptop and sent a single email to my attorney with the subject line, "Proceed." Attached were all the documents I had collected, the financial statements, the offshore transfers, the draft agreements, the timeline that exposed exactly how calculated their betrayal had been. My attorney responded within minutes. "Got it. You're protected. We'll file everything when the time is right." I breathed, long and steady. Then I called a moving company and scheduled a full pack-and store for the following day. When the movers arrived, I pointed to only 3 categories. What I brought into the marriage. What I bought with my own income. What holds personal significance. Everything else could stay. I had no intention of arguing over plates or furniture or gifts from people I never wanted to socialize with again. By evening, my belongings were neatly packed and grouped. I stood in the middle of the office, surrounded by empty shelves, and felt lighter. I checked into a temporary rental downtown, a small apartment with big windows and no memories. I ordered takeout, sat on the floor with a blanket pulled over my knees, and watched the lights of the city flicker outside my window. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It was peaceful. It was mine. The next morning, the Boston Globe published a small article in the business section, subtle, discreet, but devastating for someone like the Hartwells. Hartwell Investment Group faces inquiry after financial irregularities. It didn't mention me. It didn't need to. The questions had already begun swirling around the family name. 3 donors withdrew from Beatrice's charity gala within 24 hours. 2 of Richard's board members resigned ahead of an internal audit. And quietly, very quietly, someone at the vineyard in Italy leaked rumors about an American family unable to pay for a simple lunch. Every circle the Hartwells once dominated now whispered about them behind closed doors. Their empire wasn't collapsing because of me. It was collapsing because its foundation was already rotting. I had simply stopped holding it upright. That afternoon, a knock sounded at my door. I looked through the peephole. Liam. He looked nothing like the polished man I married. His eyes were sunken, his cheeks hollow, his shoulders sagging under the weight of a reality he hadn't prepared for. When I opened the door, he didn't speak at first. He just looked at me with a grief so complicated I couldn't interpret it. Finally, he whispered, "Claire, please. Can I come in?" I considered him. I considered the man I once loved. I considered the betrayal, the secrecy, the manipulation. And I stepped aside, not because he deserved it, but because I wanted to hear whatever he thought he had left to say before I closed this chapter forever. He walked inside and sank onto the couch, covering his face with his hands as if trying to gather the fragments of his dignity. "Everything is falling apart," he said quietly. "My father might lose the firm. My mother is refusing to leave the house. Isabella is furious. My sister won't stop crying." I crossed my arms. And what does any of that have to do with me? He looked up sharply. It has everything to do with you. You exposed us. No, I said evenly. You exposed yourselves. I just stopped covering for you. He swallowed hard. Claire, do you still love me? I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said the most honest thing I'd spoken in months. I loved the man I thought you were. But he wasn't real. He flinched, as though the truth burned. I can fix this, he said desperately. We can fix this. I'll talk to my parents. I'll apologize. I'll end things with Isabella. We can go to counseling. Stop, I said gently. He froze. Liam, you didn't lose me because of one mistake. You lost me because of a pattern of choices. You built a life I wasn't meant to survive in. He looked at me with something fragile in his expression, regret, maybe. Or resignation. Then what do you want from me, he whispered. Nothing, I said. The word hung in the air like a clean cut. I picked up the envelope on the table and handed it to him. Inside were 2 documents, the divorce settlement drafted by my attorney and a list of items I was legally claiming, nothing that belonged to the Hartwells. He stared at it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sign it, I said softly. And let's stop pretending we were ever equals in your family's eyes. He looked down, blinked several times, and then whispered, okay. And just like that. The version of my life that had once felt like everything dissolved into something I could finally step out of. Liam sat on my couch holding the envelope as if it were a verdict he already knew he deserved. His thumb traced the folded edge, his breathing uneven, his expression a tangled mix of pain, disbelief, and something that almost resembled acceptance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt strangely gentle, like the last breath before a candle flickers out. Finally, he whispered, I never thought you'd leave. I felt no pride in that admission, only clarity. You thought I would stay because staying was easier for you. His eyes squeezed shut. I didn't want this to happen. But you planned for it, I said softly. At that, his eyes snapped open, glistening with something raw. I planned for a version of this where you weren't hurt. That's not a version that exists, I replied. You can't betray someone cleanly, Liam. You can't orchestrate an exit and expect them to walk out smiling. He looked down at the papers again, his fingers trembling. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he murmured. It was always going to be like this, I countered, my voice warm but firm. Because you chose deception over conversation. Image over intimacy. Convenience over honesty. His jaw tensed, and his voice cracked as he asked, Do you hate me? I took a slow breath. No, I said, surprising even myself. Hate would mean I still have something to lose. And I don't. Not anymore. He blinked hard, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Hartwells didn't cry in front of anyone, not even the people they hurt. He cleared his throat. My parents won't survive this scandal. They'll survive, I said. They just won't survive untouched. There's a difference. You don't understand, he snapped, not angry at me, but at the situation unraveling around him. My father's partners are calling emergency meetings. My mother, she can't speak to her friends without them grilling her about Italy. Everything is slipping. And none of that is my burden, I said gently. Not anymore. He let out a hollow laugh, running both hands through his hair. God, Claire, you were always stronger than I was. I just had less to hide, I replied. He signed the papers that afternoon. His signature was shaky, almost childlike, far different from the elegant, practiced script he used on charity invitations and business memos. When he finished, he pushed the papers back to me with the quiet resignation of someone who finally understood that the person sitting across from him was no longer the woman he thought he controlled. Isabella is pregnant, he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, I said. His head jerked up. You know? I held his gaze. I saw the messages. He seemed to crumble, his shoulders folding inward. I didn't know how to leave you. You didn't need to know how, I said. You needed to be honest. He let out a ragged breath. Do you hate her? No, I said. She didn't make vows to me. He nodded slowly, as if processing a truth he had never considered. She wants us to move in together, he said quietly. But everything is such a mess now. My family. Liam, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm, your family's crisis is not my story anymore. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since I met him, he looked like a man standing alone in a world he never expected to navigate without someone smoothing the edges for him. He stood slowly. If you ever need anything. I won't, I said softly. A faint, heartbreakingly sad smile crossed his face. Not self-pity. Not manipulation. Just acceptance. You really are done. I really am, I said. He nodded once, then again, as if needing to hear it internally. Goodbye, Claire. Goodbye, Liam. He walked out of my apartment with the same gait he'd entered my life, quiet, sure, unaware of the storm he carried, only this time he carried the weight alone. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled a breath so deep it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the window and let the sunlight spill over me. Boston looked different now, not the city of compromise, but a city of possibility. A place where I could build something that didn't require shrinking myself. That night, I cooked dinner for one. I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and sat at my small kitchen table eating slowly, deliberately, savoring the quiet I had once mistaken for loneliness. Now it felt like space. Room. Breath. The next few weeks unfolded like a gentle unraveling. The Hartwell scandal, once contained, grew legs. An investment partner leaked details of the internal inquiry. A columnist hinted at family turmoil and an unexpected disruption during a lavish Roman celebration. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into articles. Articles turned into damage control. None of it involved me, not directly. I didn't make statements. I didn't retaliate. I didn't engage. Still, my silence held more power than anything I could have said. Meridian events, ironically, saw a spike in new inquiries. Clients who had once eyed me with a mix of admiration and condescension suddenly saw a woman who didn't bend under pressure, someone who didn't crumble when power tried to crush her. They trusted my resilience. And I trusted it too. I rebuilt my life slowly, piece by piece. I furnished my apartment with things chosen only because I loved them, not because they matched a façade. I took on projects that made me feel proud instead of small. I began to rediscover what it felt like to exist without looking over my shoulder. I also learned something unexpected. Freedom is quieter than revenge. But it lasts longer. 6 months later, I received an embossed invitation in my inbox, Beatrice Hartwell's next charity gala. A request for Meridian Events to submit a proposal. I laughed, genuinely, deeply, without bitterness. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to survive. But I declined with a single, simple line. Fully booked. All the best. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need them to crumble for me to rise. Their collapse wasn't my joy, and my growth didn't require their suffering. The divorce finalized without theatrics. The settlement remained exactly as I had written it. I kept what was mine. He kept what wasn't. I walked away clean. Months later, I found myself standing on a terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast, coordinating a wedding for clients who trusted me wholeheartedly. The sea breeze whipped through my hair as the sun set in a blaze of gold across the horizon. A server approached with a glass of Prosecco. Everything is ready, Signora Bennett. Shall we begin? Yes, I said, smiling softly. We shall. As the string quartet began tuning their instruments, I glanced at the empty seat beside me, one I had never planned to fill. The memory of a missing chair in Rome flashed through my mind, but this time it didn't sting. It felt symbolic. A reminder. A promise. A beginning. That missing seat had once been my humiliation. Now it was my liberation. And as the first notes of the ceremony music drifted into the air, I lifted my glass to the coastline, to the sunset, to myself, and whispered the truth I had finally learned. The seat they remove from you is often the seat you were never meant to take. Because you were never meant to sit quietly at someone else's table. You were meant to build your own. And I had.